All right, welcome to our next talk at PLMW. I'm excited to welcome Amal Ahmed, who's going to be talking about managing your research, your advisor, and your PhD. And Amal is currently just mentioned she's in Providence, which is currently being hit with a tropical storm. So if we suddenly lose her, then I guess we'll have to improvise, but I hope that doesn't happen. In the meantime, let's welcome Amal.
Hi, thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, so let's hope no disruptions for the next hour or whatever, 45 minutes. Hi, I'm here to talk today. By the way, this interface is slightly strange, so bear with me. I only see my slides. I don't see any of you because I'm sharing screen that way, but hopefully this works. Okay, so I'm here today to talk about managing your research, managing your advisor, and how to manage your PhD. What I hope to get across in this talk is, just to kind of give you a sense of what an ideal PhD and kind of an ideal relationship with your advisor during that PhD looks like, so that you can make better decisions about maybe even what advisor and PhD program to pick, given that, many of you attendees, I think, are pre-PhD right now. And for those of you who are already in a PhD program, to just kind of give you a better sense of how you can think about this process, reflect on things you want and need, and therefore try to get more out of your advisor and out of your years as a PhD student, in a sense. Okay, so let's dive into it. So the years I'm going to cover are sort of, as I said, some of you are pre-PhD, maybe a year or two before applying to PhD programs. But I'm going to try to give you a sense, and this is important for you, even if you are not in a PhD program yet. I'm going to try to give you a sense of what those years look like and what it is that you're trying to do ideally during that time, how to maximize that. Here's my caveat. I've been based in the US forever. I got my undergraduate, master's, PhD degrees here. I've been a professor here forever. So this talk is geographically biased. In the US, a PhD tends to be, about 5.5 to 6 years, ideally. And in Europe, of course, that's less. So everything that I say, if I'm saying year 4, just divide everything by 2/3. And if you're in Europe or something, and you get about the right estimate. Okay. So let's start by talking about those of you who are pre-PhD. How should you be looking for PhD programs? Where do you even apply, right? Of course, the first thing that you should be doing, some of this is obvious, is you should be asking which PL faculty and PL departments would be a good match for you, given your interests, right? I found that if you just kind of go about this on your own, it's not so great. You really do need some insider insight. So if you have a PL faculty member in your department, maybe you're already doing research with them, in which case it's great, they already know you, or maybe someone whom you've taken a PL class with or something, someone whom if you can ask them for advice about schools. If you listen to PL faculty rattle on about their colleagues at other universities, they can give you such a span of information, such a wide range of information in just a few minutes, really, like tell you, oh, at such and such place, they have a really strong group that focuses on that. This person does this, oh, you're interested in that kind of thing. These places would be best for you, so it kind of helps you zoom in really, really fast. So I think that's kind of really important to try to seek out. And if you don't have a local PL person, then you're here at PLMW. Try to find, we're going to have this mentoring session later today, go to those tables, sit at a table, try to get some of this advice, try to form a connection with someone there. And, senior people are happy to help out and kind of connect with you and give you some input on that. And of course, the next bit, decide what it is that really interests you, right? You're going to attend talks, read the introductions of papers. There are a whole lot of papers here at ICFP. Read their abstracts, and if the abstract interests you, read the intro. You may not be sort of technically savvy enough yet to go read the whole paper, and that's fine. Just if the intro seems, kind of gets captures your interest, then that this might be something that you're interested in, and you can seek out the faculty members as your future advisor and kind of think about, oh, okay, so you do this kind of work, this really appeals to me, I'm really interested, and maybe reach out to them. The last bit is the part that's really important. Email or talk to the faculty whose work interests you, whom you're interested in applying to work with, because if you just read my papers, then what I did the last year or 2 years, right? because that's how long it takes to produce a paper. But you don't know what I'm planning to do or what I'm really intrigued about over the next 5 years. And that's really key, right? That's why you need to sort of email, connect with, reach out to these people so that you have a sense of, when you are their PhD students over the next 5 years, what is it that they really want to be working on? So that gives you a good sense. And please feel free to interrupt with questions. Lindsay, I cannot see questions in chat or anything, so if you want to interrupt, that's totally fine. Okay. Now, yeah, so the most important factor when deciding where you should go, suppose you've applied, you've gotten into a bunch of schools, and now you're trying to decide where to go. So the most important factor is your advisor. That really should be the thing. Like, you should be asking, is this person a good fit for me, both in terms of my technical interests, my research interests, and also in terms of personality, so research interests is really, really important, because if they don't match, then you won't be able to kind of, my sense is you won't do as well over your 5-6 years, because the advisor is such an integral part. And I'll come back to this throughout this talk. Like, the role of the advisor is something I'm going to talk about later, and why an advisor should be such a good fit kind of becomes clearer. But more than that, I think this is a period of time when you should take the time to reflect on what it is that you are about, right? What are your goals? What are your ambitions? Do you want to be a faculty member? Some students are so afraid to even say that, oh, I want to be a faculty member later, but don't be. Like, at least be honest with yourself. What are your own internal ambitions? What is it that you aspire to? And kind of go with that, all right? Because that's going to then guide what's on my next bit. Maybe next slide, actually, in a little bit. What sort of questions you should be asking these future advisors. I'll come back to that. The second most important criteria when picking a place is the lab culture and the peer group that you will be with, because you will learn an awful lot from them. Like, as much as you learn from your advisor, you're learning from the people who surround you. Because these people are the people who will provide support, will provide technical conversations, will provide feedback on how you explain things. So that's really important. So you want to try to get a sense of what is the lab culture like. How do people interact? How frequently do they see each other? And what kind of relationships do they have in terms of exchanging technical ideas and so on, and supporting each other? Now, this is something I used to say in the before times when we weren't all working from home. I used to say that labs where people mostly work from home and students don't talk to each other much can be isolating. But of course, now you have to take that with a little bit of a caveat, obviously. Still, even, in the last year and a half, we've if you have a good lab culture, you're doing that on Zoom. You're still connecting with each other and making an effort. Though, of course, it's much more different. Hopefully we get back to more normal soon. Now, something that people talk about a lot is, but I think is much less important, is things like financial incentives, right? So every university is trying to make sure, you might have a difference of, if you're applying to one city versus another, institution in one city versus another, there may be a difference in a couple of $1,000s or something like that, or maybe a little more even. But these things in the long run matter a lot less. Of course, as long as your basic needs are met, I think that is, these tiny differences should not be the main deciding factor. The main deciding factor is really advisor fit and lab stuff. The other thing is prestige of the institution that you are applying to. Many students don't kind of get hung up on that, right? Like, they'll say, I got into a top 5 school. I want to go to the top 5 school. But, do you really want to go to the top 5 school if you're not getting this feeling that there is an advisor there who is the perfect fit for you? Don't do it. That's no good. It won't end up well for you in the long run, because really, advisor fit is what matters the most. And then, of course, there's location. Of course, if you have a two-bed problem, like your partner is in a certain city, that you have to take account. That's a very personal and really important. It's important to be happy. That you have to take that into account. Okay, but location just for you, maybe not so much. I don't know. Okay, so let's talk about advisor fit. You attend their visit days, and you should ask a lot of questions. You should talk to their, what does that mean, right? One of the things you should do is you should talk to their current and former students, because every advisor the way we are with our current and former students, that's really who we are in a sense, right? Like that's who we're going to be as an advisor. There's not much kind of hiding that. So you can really get a very good sense of what people are like, what they will be like to work with from their current and former students. You should ask, what can you expect to work on, right? So some advisors take students and say, you're going to work on this project because this is the big project that's going on, so everyone's going to work on this. There are others who say, oh, okay, you come in, you do like kind of a starter project, and then we figure out what it is that you would like to work on, right? They give you freedom to pick a topic. Which one do you prefer, right? It's about you. It's about what you think you want and need, in a sense. Then there are issues like some advisors have, are running a large project with a large project team, or that can have tremendous benefits because when you have so many people working on a large project, obviously you can build something bigger and you can have a much larger impact. Okay, so that's really cool. Plus you have this sort of, you're working with a bunch of people. It's really great. The downside of that can be, that often in these very large project teams, like if you have 10 PhD students working on a project over the span of some number of years, a lot of the time in my experience, I've found that it's only one or two who make it big, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And I don't know what it is that you could do to make sure that you're the one who makes it big. I don't know. That's a very strange thing, but it's just a thing. It's something to keep in mind and kind of be aware of. Individual projects, on the other hand, it's sort of a flip. The pros and cons are utterly flipped. With an individual project, you're the star. It's your baby. That's the thing, and you will be the one who will be known for this. But the downside with individual projects is that sometimes that can be a little bit, isolating. And individual projects don't have to be you alone. Of course, there can be at least one other or two other students on it who are sort of more junior, and maybe that's not their dissertation topic, but they're working on it. So trying to get a sense of how your advisor works, right? Like how are they setting up work for their current PhD students? You have to ask how big a group do they have, and in relation to that, some people can have a big group and still make an awful lot of time for their students. But that's the intel you get from their former students. How do they train students for academia versus research labs? That's a question I would ask. What they say in their answer can really tell you a lot about how they think about their role as an advisor. Okay, so ask them. I'd like to go into academia. Do you do anything differently to train students for academia? Or what do you think I should do if I want a teaching position afterwards? Much more than like sort of a research kind of university. And then finally, results, right? So how well did their current and former students do? You can look at what papers did they publish. Okay, but when I say what papers they published, please don't go counting how many papers they published, because that doesn't mean anything. It's sort of like, impactful papers at a small number of papers at sort of top venues are much more important than you're counting how many papers someone produced, but just you should have a sense of, are their students being productive? Are they getting results? What's the research reputation of the students that they graduated, or the ones that they currently have? What kind of jobs are their students getting post PhD, right? And I have to say, you have to take this with a grain of salt. Sometimes if students are not doing, a lot of the time, if students are not doing well, it's not the fault of the advisor, right? It may not even be the fault of the student. It's just just ask. Don't just look at these things and try to get a sense of, oh, how well did they do? You have to ask more questions and get to the bottom of things. Okay, so let's
have a question, actually.
Yeah, go ahead.
And my daughter, by the way, wants to pay a visit. But we have a question in the Q&A, which is, what recommendations do you have for finding a group to do research with before beginning your PhD?
Before beginning your PhD. So it depends on your circumstances. Can you find a group to do research with, research that is interesting to you locally at your undergrad institution? Or do you not have some opportunity like that and you have to reach out further? So different advice for the two different things, or maybe it can be sort of bundled into one thing. Reaching out is important, right? So I can talk about how I have undergraduates come do research with me. So I actually try to get undergraduates involved in doing research with me very early. So those of you who are, early, I don't know how many there might be, but you can start doing research with someone in like year 2 of your undergraduate years. The way I do it is I take students from who are in my first year intro CS course, and at the end I teach a couple of weeks of like slightly PL-ish thing, like how to build an interpreter, compiler, etc. And what a type system is at a very, very basic level, just to, kind of introduce the topic. And then I say, hey, those of you who are interested in this stuff, you might want to come talk to me. I'll run a reading group in the spring. This is how I do things. Of course, you may not have someone at your institution who does things, but let's turn it around. If you go reach out to someone and say, at your institution at least, right? And say, I would really like to get involved in research. What do you need to do so that that person says yes to you, in a sense? Well, first of all, they have to be able to accommodate one more person that they're kind of supervising and advising. But the other thing is read stuff. Ask them if you can spend a semester simply reading papers with them without actually doing any research whatsoever. Right? Because research is hard. There's so much background required before you can actually be productive. So if you're willing to invest a semester, maybe even a year, reading papers, kind of meeting them, if they're willing to give you like an hour a week, or an hour even every 2 weeks, but if you're doing your part and reading stuff and showing up, right, then they will take you, is my experience. That's what we faculty members are like. Right? So I'm just saying that, some of this requires building. The same thing that I said about, people at your institution kind of applies further away too. You might want to reach out to someone, send an email, say, I'm really interested in these topics. Could you suggest papers to read? I'd really like to get involved in this research. They give you papers. You say, if you have a little bit of time, could we keep meeting on Zoom? And you build that relationship. And what they're doing at that point is they're just being generous with their time and trying to get you interested. If you do your part and really, really like follow up, read the papers, do things like that, then you're kind of in, they will want to work with you. They will be impressed by you. So I don't know, does that answer the question? I'm happy to take like follow up, or it depends on your particular situation, I guess.
I want to throw in one more question that's highly upvoted, which is it necessary to have publications in order to apply for PhD programs?
No, absolutely not. But it is very good to have research experience. If you have done research, but it's not necessarily a publication yet, if you have done research with someone for a year or 2 years, something like that, whatever, then they will be able to write a letter for you which explains how you are as a researcher, what your strengths and weaknesses are. And if you're applying to work with me, to work with any one of us, right, that's what we're looking for in those letters, because we want to know that what you're like. And we also actually like students who have at least some research experience, because then that means you're not just walking into a PhD with no research experience and you might end up hating it, right? For us advisors, that's the biggest risk. We want people who know themselves, who understand that they want this, in a sense. That's the best scenario for us. So if you have some research experience and you know that you want this, perfect. That makes it just so much better for us and easier, tempting to admit you and to want to work with you. Okay. All right. Okay, so I'll go on to talking about sort of year one. All right, so let's say you've just applied to a PhD program, you've gotten in. What's your first year like? I'll go through some of the things that people, some of what to expect and some of what to focus on. So people make this difference. You're doing research, you're taking classes, and maybe you're TAing in your first year. But the thing that has to be said over and over again, and maybe people have heard it, is you have to focus on your research. All right, when you start a PhD is about the research, and you have to get started early. If you stay in that sort of undergraduate or master's mindset where you say, oh, but I have classes to do and I must do this, right? And not make time for the research, then in a sense, you're kind of losing out. You will start later. You just have to kind of switch mindset and start making time for research alongside all of these other things that might seem much more urgent. I have this line later on which says, don't let the urgent trump the important. So make sure you do that. So the other thing, I like to call this, my students work on at the very beginning, a starter project. A starter project is something that helps you learn the technical skills that are important to the, that are being used by the people in your group, become familiar with a certain class of literature, and, ideally leads to a first research paper. So a starter project is something that at least I normally will, I'll talk to my student, depending on what their interests are, figure out what it is that they might be interested, what might be a good fit for them, and then suggest it. It doesn't have to be that you come up with a starter project. It's usually the advisor can come up with a starter project in consultation with what your interests are. The other thing in year one, is you're building a relationship with your advisor. You're meeting with your advisor. You should think about how you communicate with your advisor. So you should always have a weekly meeting, in my opinion, on the calendar. But don't just wait for a weekly meeting. All right. I know advisors are busy and stuff, but like try to make sure that you can pop in if you're stuck, or if you need a little bit of input during the week, instead of waiting days until the next weekly meeting. And by pop in, I mean, these days we're at home. A lot of us have been stuck at home, but the way that my students pop in is they message me on Slack, right? And we end up having a conversation, or we end up hopping on Zoom in order to do that. So that's what I mean by popping. Just don't disappear for a week and say, oh, advisor doesn't have time for me for a week, therefore I won't do anything. That slows you down. The other thing that bears saying, and often you expect, it's an obvious one, but it's not as well. Keep good notes of your research meetings, all right? Follow up on the things that in the meeting somewhat, you sort of said are, oh, we should do this next. What are the questions that came up? Follow up on those questions. Go do the follow-up reading or whatever that helps you answer those questions. In other words, it's your project. You have to manage it, all right? When I meet with my students, I expect them to keep notes of what we did. And if you don't keep good notes, then basically what's happening is that, all of the progress, that precious hour that you spent kind of brainstorming and thinking through things and working through things with the advisor, or maybe the other people who are working on the project, it will be lost, right? And it ends up super slowing you down. So keep very good notes, follow up. Something else that we always ask PhD students to do is attend talks, especially hiring talks, right? Now, I know you get busy with research and classes and TAing and all of the other things that you suddenly have to juggle all of these things at the same time, but that's what academia is. It is kind of juggling and balancing a lot of these different things at the same time. Attending talks is important because it develops breadth. Attending hiring talks lets you see how, people in other areas present their work to people who are outside their area, right? Or how people in your area present work to people who are outside, who might be outside their area, broadly in computer science, not just in PL, let's say. But the other thing is you understand if someone who is more systems-y or security is giving a talk, you understand by watching a whole bunch of these, you start to form a mental map of where they're coming from. What are the things they take for granted in that subfield? And that mental map helps you enormously when you are in that position of giving a job talk or, a wider audience talk later in your PhD career. So it's really important. It puts you in the right mindset. It helps you understand these other audiences better when you have to talk to them. Okay, imposter syndrome. I want to talk about this. People, junior PhD students in particular, but PhD students overall, and frankly, most of us, even after that, we all experience imposter syndrome, all right? It's this feeling of I know less than everyone else, or I don't quite belong here, all right? Now, what I want to say about I know less than everyone else is when you're in your first or second year, you obviously know less than everyone else because everyone else is a more senior PhD student or their faculty. So don't dwell on it. It's how it is. One day you will be the senior PhD student and someone else will feel, oh, this person knows so much more than me, right? So that's just the way the system is set up, and it's supposed to be that way. And it's a good thing, right? Now, you want to go into this with an attitude of the department that you are in is a safe space. These 5 years, this safe space is where you get to make mistakes and you get to learn from those mistakes. You get feedback on how to improve. If you don't treat it as that safe space, you will not grow, right? You have to sort of put yourself out there and discuss ideas with others, small scale over lunch with fellow PhD students. You have to give talks about work in progress in the department and be open to feedback from more senior students about how you might, or postdocs or faculty, about how you might explain or motivate an idea better. And if you don't actually get up there and do it, then you won't get better, right?
you won't be able to grow. So the way I think of it is the department is this safe space, this bubble, right? Where you are growing and developing and making mistakes and learning. You shouldn't be competing with people inside that department, right? The world outside is, there's the inside and there's the outside, right? Doing all this inside the department is preparing you for the outside world and for wherever you're going to go after your PhD. So keep that in mind and ask lots of questions. It's fine to not know things. We are there to learn. Okay. I love to put on this slide of a metamorphosis. I'm still sort of amazed at what happens across the 5-6 years of a PhD. We take someone who was an undergraduate, and by the end of the 5-6 years, they are my colleague, right? How does that happen? That's a change in a person, right? That's an immense amount of growth. So keep that in mind. You are being trained to be part of a large research community, to talk about technical things, to learn technical things, and motivate future research and so on, right? It really is a tremendous kind of growth and almost exponential kind of growth that happens across these years. So keep that in mind, especially in year one. Keep that in mind that you'll be the butterfly at the end. Okay. So focusing on classes and ignoring research, I think I've already said that. Don't do that. Don't let the urgent trump the important. This next one is very interesting, and many PhD students do this. You have your weekly meeting with your advisor, and the day before, you didn't get a lot of work done during the week, and so the day before you really try to get stuff together. Don't do that. Working for a day before your weekly meeting means that you will make progress extremely slowly, right? So it's really important to develop consistent work habits. You should treat a PhD as, a consistent job where your job is to kind of do research on a daily, or teaching or TAing or classes or whatever, right? But you're doing things on a daily basis, right? So it's important to do focused work and do it consistently. Minimal effort just doesn't, it's not enough for research. Even if it worked for you and got you straight A's in college, it won't work for research. Another thing we do, PhD students do, is avoiding the advisor, right? We advisors are busy. And especially if your advisor is super busy, they may not, have the time or, sometimes mental bandwidth to come and push you and ask you, so what are you doing, right? So it becomes easy to avoid advisors. But you're the one who loses valuable research time, right? And makes slower progress when you do that. So don't do that. Reach out to your advisor, stay connected throughout the week. Whenever anything kind of technical comes up, make them aware. The other thing is, common pitfall, not investing time in making lab friends. We all get busy. We feel like we have to finish an assignment for a class, or we have to, do something for research, or we're writing a paper to send it out or something. I don't know. That's probably not in year one. But, you have to take time to make connections, because your lab is your support and learning network. You have to take the time to explain technical ideas to others, hang out with them over lunch and explain technical ideas, say what you're doing, what you're stuck on. This helps you improve and helps you feel connected. Okay, so the next chunk of my talk is about the role of the advisor. I want to help all of you understand the role of the advisor so that you go into this knowing how, what the ideal kind of is, what to expect from the advisor. I found that many students don't really know, and they just kind of go on week to week, let the advisor kind of set the agenda perhaps, and maybe the advisor's not setting it too well. Maybe all you're doing in every single meeting is talking about just the one technical, technical project that you're working on. I want to give you a sense of that it's far more than that, okay? So let's talk about it. So what does your advisor do? Well, at the very beginning, they help you pick a starter project, which is something I've really talked about. But even with the starter project, here's what I want to say. With your starter project and later with your dissertation, I think that one of the biggest things that an advisor does for you is make sure that you are working on something that people care about, that you're not simply wasting your time, okay? And that is super important. So, and this is for people who might be junior advisors, I don't know, who are in the audience, right? That's something that is really kind of a big thing that we do for our students. We help them we assess for them that are you working on something that people care about. Okay, advisors, of course, next one's obvious, help you develop technical skills, whether it's how to do proofs in a good way or how to implement stuff and empirical work, right? There are good, high standards of doing each one of these things, and your advisor ought to be teaching you how to do them. And some people do more theoretical work, so it's proof, and some people do more empirical work, so it's how do you do measurements and benchmarking and things. What I find less effective is when an advisor says, hey, yeah, you're here now, year one, whatever. Go read these papers and let's find a problem. All right. I find that asking a very junior student to just go find a problem is not a good way to proceed. It's just not an effective use of their time. So, maybe if your advisor is kind of doing that, you can suggest that, I'd really love it if you could suggest something that we could work on that, what do you find interesting? Get into a conversation about with them. Help make you part of the research community. As advisors, I really think, back to that metamorphosis slide, I sometimes think about what it is that we're doing across those 6 years. And what we're really doing is we, in our weekly meetings with you, are stand-ins for the research community, at least for the first couple of years when you're not even maybe, going to conferences and talking to other senior researchers or whatever, right? We are your stand-in for the research community. And we are the ones who ought to be having conversations with you about what other researchers would think of this work that we are doing. All right, that's really important. So we're in a meeting and suddenly, we're talking about something and I'd be like, no, but, this doesn't quite work. So-and-so, I don't know, people I know, Bob Harper, one of my idols when I was in grad school, thinks that this is a bad idea because of XYZ, things like that. Like, I know that because I've had conversations with Bob Harper and I know how he thinks about certain things, right? Or, other people in the community, or we can inform you about pockets of the community and what is kind of considered good work and what isn't, and why something is a good idea or a bad idea. And it doesn't mean that you have to just subscribe to that and say, oh, so-and-so thinks this is a bad idea, so I won't do it. No, that's not what this is about. It's about giving you a sense of what they think so that you can rebut appropriately, right? And develop those skills of motivating your own work and rebutting certain criticism. They help you develop research taste and high research standards. And this is kind of connected to the last part, right? Research standards of the community, what is considered good research. So in your meetings, maybe not every single meeting, but every 2-3 meetings, we should be going back to this question of why exactly are we doing this? Or why exactly are we making this next decision in our work? What are the benefits overall of the project, of the thing? Like, if we succeed, what are the benefits? What's the message? How do we motivate it? Okay, so these are really important things. Now, something that I really don't like is when students think of the advisor as a boss. If you think of your advisor as a boss, someone that is assigning you tasks and you are doing them, then that's not going to be a good way to proceed. You'll probably just kind of do the bare minimum to get along, to satisfy your boss, but you're not doing this for them. The most important product of your PhD is you, and if you remember one thing from this talk, you should remember that. That's the most important product of your PhD. Do this for you. All the work that you're doing for you, really. You're just sort of peripherally doing it for your advisor, in the sense that you're collaborators. So the advisor-student relationship is a complicated relationship, right? Your advisor is your boss. Don't go on vacation without giving them a good amount of advance notice. That's kind of irritating. But they're ideally your mentor. They are a collaborator on all of your papers. So their success is somehow intertwined with your success, right? But they're also your evaluator. They are being asked to judge you. At the end of your 5-6 years, they will be writing you letters, and they will be writing it in the sense, based on what they've seen. They're not going to lie in the letter. But they are also, at the same time, this contradiction, they are also your promoter. So when they write those letters, they ought to be promoting you. They ought to be promoting you throughout your 5 years. When I go to conferences, I say, oh, so I don't say it's my paper. I actually say it's William's paper. It's Max's paper. These are actually my former students, or it's Daniel's paper. I promote it as it's their work, and this is what they're doing, and this is how they're thinking, so that the community starts to become aware of them early. The advisor is also a sort of source of support when you're feeling down and research isn't working out, or you're getting, a paper got rejected. They help you understand how to perceive that, right? So much more. But on the other hand, advisors are busy people, all right? So you will be most effective if you manage to understand them and develop strategies for engaging them so that your needs are met. All right, and that means technical engagement over the course of the week. As I said, don't just disappear for a week. Tell them how your thing is going. All right, so if they're busy people, if one of my students asks me to read something and I don't have time to read it over the week, they have a a few of my students are very good at sort of very nicely saying, Amal, I really need you to read this. Like, oh, I will. And then I do, So like, don't mind that they get busy. They do get busy, but do ask them again so that your needs are met. And you can ask nicely, right? They help you with research and thesis planning. So every 6 months, you ought to be having some sort of a meeting with your advisor about, where are we now and what's the next step? If you just finished a project, you have this, or a paper, you have a conversation about, all right, what are next steps, right? So the planning over the course of the 6 years or 5 years. They have to provide career advice and planning for job search, like, and help you sort of figure out what you need to do in order to get the outcome you want, the job you want at the end of the PhD process. And they have to help you learn skills, and these are lots of different skills. Grant writing might be one of them. Somewhere in the course of your PhD, you might want to at least help a little bit with writing a grant. It's a tremendously valuable experience because writing a grant is nothing like writing a paper. It's like so much broader. And reviewing papers, how do you review a paper? What kind of tone do you write the review in? What kind of criticism is considered good? And is it too soft? Is it too hard? Like that sort of thing. How to pitch your research to other people when you might run into them at conferences or whatever else. How are we doing on time, Lindsay? I'm not sure when we started because we were a bit late.
So I'm okay with running about 5 minutes over. Officially, this ends in 2 minutes, and we have lots of good questions coming in.
Okay.
So I would like to reserve a little time for Q&A.
Okay. Yeah, did we start at 11:20 or yeah, okay, I just didn't know. All right, so let me see. I'm not going to get through a lot of this, but let me kind of talk about a few things. Students get very worried about publishing. How many papers do I need to publish, and how much do I need to, when do I need to have my first paper? But I would say, what's important on this slide is that last part. A few high quality papers are better than many so-so papers. Really keep that in mind. And what I found, what I have under this sort of my ideal, I think a student should work on a starter project and, publish that within a couple of years or something. And at the same time, they can, when I say starter project, I mean that you are primary author. It's your project, right? You can, of course, be involved at the same time in other projects as a sort of second or third author, and that's a great way to kind of work with your group and collaborate and things like that, right? You don't want to, it depends on what kind of work it is. Sometimes papers are very large teams and sometimes they're smaller. But then, somewhere after that starter project phase, so in the US, I would say, a couple of years in, you want to take your time, investigate something deep. So like year 3 onwards, don't be in a rush to just keep producing papers. Papers are, bean counting, who cares? If you produce a whole bunch of little small papers, that's not going to help you. But if you kind of pull back, investigate something deep, if you internalize the literature in an area, I've found that when people do that, they open up a whole new research area. They become the expert in it, and then it leads to a burst after that. Usually 3-4 papers before they even finish, all in the last year or 2, but that happens because they invested the time. So do that. That's the way to sort of achieve success. Keep in mind that it's not research if it can't fail. An advisor can help with backup plans, and they can help you decide like when should we pull the plug if this is too risky. And the other risk is that will people care if you solve your deep problem, right? You spend so much time working on it, but you should constantly, as I said before, keep having these conversations of what are the odds that the way that you are solving this is going to be practical, that it's going to be convincing. You need to kind of keep revisiting that question because it's risky, right? You don't know where it's going to go, but as it goes, keep revisiting, right? That question of will it be convincing, will it be practical? You should, or are there compelling applications? So just reflect on that throughout the process. Lindsay, I can kind of stop here if you want to just go into questions, and of course I can make my slides available. The next part is just, across the different years, what kinds of conversations should you be having with your advisor? So it's up to you. We can switch to Q&A, or I can.
Yeah, let's do some Q&A.
Okay.
So there's the most highly upvoted question right now is, which I'll share on stage right now, is how would you go about finding out whether an advisor or a research group is a good fit before entering into a formal relationship with them?
Okay, so the best thing is you need to have long conversations with them. Like I normally have a conversation with my students before I admit them. Usually, applications come in. I talk to them in January for about an hour. Then I talk to them after I admit them for at least an hour, and then they come to open house and we talk for a few hours. In those few hours, you should be asking questions. You should be asking all of those questions that I mentioned before, right? What do you do in order to train people for this kind of position versus that kind of position? What's your perspective on solo projects, or large projects versus versus smaller ones? How much freedom do you give? How do you operate with your PhD students? And again, these questions you also, or some flavor of these questions, you also need to ask their former PhD students. If you have these conversations, you will develop a very deep sense of who they are. I'll give you an example of a student that just this spring, whom we were trying to recruit. I was really impressed at how she was listening to everyone she talked to. She was telling me about how she talked to some other advisors, PhD students, and she was talking to junior students, and they were all like, oh yeah, this person's so great and so technically so smart and so awesome and whatever. And she's like, but then as I talk to students who are more senior and I ask them questions like, what does your advisor do to mentor you? Have you had conversations about, job stuff? Have you had conversations about how do we motivate, research in this kind of area or this direction or whatever? What kind of conversations are you having? And she was getting nothing, right? So that's a deep way of asking questions and listening to the answers and using that to form a map of who this person is. So, I would say you just have to be reflective and kind of probe a lot. Don't just say, oh, highly ranked school, famous advisor, I'm going to go there. Find out. All right.
We have a couple more questions here that seem to be related that I think that you'll have some particular insight into. So one of those is, suppose one takes a break from academia after a master's to join industry for a few years. Would you look favorably on that as an advisor, an applicant with such an experience? And then a related question to that one, I think has to do with, let me find it. Oh yes, what are your thoughts about the age of a person who starts a PhD program? Is it too late to start if you're in your 30s or your late 20s?
Is it too late to start
if you're in your 30s, for instance?
Okay, I don't think it's about age. Okay, so let me take the first one and then walk into this one. So when I finished, I did an undergrad, I did a master's in databases, and I had no clue during that entire time that I wanted a PhD. And I actually went and worked for 3 years at AT&T Labs. And during that time, I kind of, I don't know, a year and a half in, I started to get bored as a developer. And that's when I realized that maybe I want to do research. It was also another set of things that happened. But anyway, so I personally think that it's really nice when students have been in industry for, let's say, 2-3 years, just so that they have experienced what it's like to be out there, right? I found that students who come straight from undergrad or master's, just from school to PhD, often tend to wonder a lot, like, what is the grass greener on the other side? Like, what would that life be like? And they don't know which one they want to commit to because they haven't experienced the other one. Whereas I found that people who have that experience for 3 years or so, first of all, they're sort of more mature in terms of, well, they're more mature in terms of what they want, right? And so they go at it, they sort of get into research and into a PhD program and are more productive, and because they know what they want, they're sort of following it. They've, this is it, they've found it. So that's my perspective. It's not always the case. I have many students who come straight from undergrad into a PhD, and people are different, but I would not look at it unfavorably. But what you do need to do is you need to make sure that whatever research experience you had before, someone is able to write you a letter. And I would say that the sweet spot is about 3 years. Don't stay out for more than 3 years, because then if you stay out for more than 3 years, then during those 3 years, you have to be doing something. You have to at least be reading research papers and reaching out to people a little bit, at least towards the end before you apply, so that you're more, you're able to talk to prospective advisors and say,
this is what I'm interested in. And they'll be impressed that, oh, wow, even though you have a full-time job, you're reading papers and trying to stay up with what's happening in research. I like to quote Sriram Krishnamurthy at this point. Sriram likes to tell his students that, don't go into a PhD program unless you know why it is you want to do that. All right, what it is that you want to do. And I think that it's really great advice. So this is a good thing, but just don't lose the connection to research and reading papers and a former research advisor. If you had any experience, don't lose that, because you need that to get in, right? Doing a PhD later in life, maybe I did a PhD later in life, right? Because I finished my undergrad. I did 2 years of, I was in my mid-20s or late 20s, but I wasn't, in my 30s. I don't think there's anything wrong with a PhD if you're in your 30s. In fact, there are many people who are truly successful. I do agree that, we tend to be ageist, frankly, in the way that we run our PhD programs. Later in life, you might have a family to support and so on. And so financial considerations become a problem for a lot of people, right? So I don't know how to solve that for you, obviously. Those are very personal things, but otherwise, it's not too late to start. Sorry, my connection seems to be going up and down.
All right. Well, let's conclude with one more question. And so this is kind of a big picture one. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, what criteria do you personally look at when picking PhD students?
I like to pick students who have prior research experience. That's probably one of my most important ones, because, as I said before, people who've done research, at least a little bit of it before, know that they like this. And that's a great indicator of success, probably, right? People who don't know whether they like this might not like it, right? And that, from our perspective, from the advisor perspective, you've spent, it's not about just funding the student for a year or two. It's about the fact that I've given you my time and attention for a year or two, and then you might decide not to continue. So that's one thing. Also, people who have prior research experience, like I've found, are not like, sort of ranking sensitive, and they're not like following, they're following the project, they're following the work, they're following the technical interests. And if they want to come work with me, then normally, I'm like, if I have students who have turned down CMU and MIT and so on to come work with me. And I find that super gratifying, because they came to work with me and we're a good fit, So anyway, that's my own personal thing. What else do I look for? Maturity and knowing what you want, right? I think that goes far beyond your technical skills. Success in PhD, success in academia is so much about how much you want it, in a sense, right? And how much like you feel that this is what I want to be doing, and you give your time and attention to it. I think that's a far greater indicator of success than, whether you got straight A's in college, right? I didn't get straight A's in college. Anyway, so is that going to be the last question?
I think so. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Let's thank them all again for the great talk.